Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Career Insights program. Like I said before, my name is Yarelis Canales. I'm one of the advisors at Beyond Barnard, and I oversee our Career Insights programs. This is, I believe, our fifth Career Insights program for the semester, with a focus in non-teaching roles within education. And I'm really, really excited for all our panelists to join us. They'll have the opportunity to introduce themselves, but I'm just so thankful that you all are here. I think that there's going to be a lot of wealth of information and knowledge shared amongst our panelists and with you all. I am going to pass it over to Christine.
Hi, everybody. I'm Christine Valenza Shin, and I'm class of '84 myself and also a former teacher. So I suppose I could be said to have a non-teaching role in education as well, having moved into higher ed and career education. So thank you, Yarelis, for not only organizing this, but for inviting me to moderate. And I'm personally really excited about this. We've had this topic on the docket for a while. I believe it was originally scheduled for March 2020 and got bumped for COVID. And it's taken us a while to bring it back, but here we are, and we've got some really great panelists lined up for you. So I'm excited to get going. So we're going to go ahead and have the panelists introduce themselves. So if you could just tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing, and then a brief recap of how you got from Barnard to where you are right at the moment. That would be a great way to start. And I'm going to go in order of my screen and ask Yadira to start.
Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here, especially with all of our Barnard students. My name is Idera Adagun. I am class of 2015. I am in Los Angeles, born and raised from Los Angeles. So I'm back home after spending a little time in New York and also Seattle for my graduate school program. I went to the University of Washington, specifically the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance. And I focused on education and social policy. And right now I'm a college counselor with a nonprofit organization called C5LA. We're a 5-year leadership youth development program that focuses on leadership development, college access, and college success. And I specifically work with our alumni who are considered college students and college graduates, or just high school graduates who decided to pursue any type of post-secondary pathway. And I had a little bit of an unconventional entry into education. I come from a family of educators. My mom is a special ed teacher. My grandma was a teacher for 50 plus years. So with that, I knew I didn't want to teach because I saw all that they had to go through. But I did want to have some type of element of my career within education. I first wanted to be a lawyer, so I actually focused on political science while at Barnard and Africana Studies. But with the time off, I took 2 years off in between school and just doing a little bit of soul searching and figuring out what I really wanted to do, what I really enjoyed. And I found myself going back to a lot of the nonprofits that I was a part of in high school, specifically Thrive Scholars and College Match, these types of higher education access programs. I decided, how can I get into these programs as an employee? And that's how I ended up researching my policy program. And education policy was an amazing experience to focus on. And I definitely will talk a little bit more about that later, but thank you.
Thank you, and welcome. And the more years go by that we do Career Insights, the more I'm convinced that nobody really has a conventional path. It's interesting, but it's always great. One of the reasons we always do these panels, we love to hear and we love to have students hear about the different pathways and the different twists and turns that come along as people take advantage of opportunities and follow their interests. Let me turn this over to Zofia to introduce herself.
All right, thank you. So I'm Zofia. I graduated in 2018, and it's very excited to be back with a group of Barnard women. I had an absolutely amazing time at Barnard, so this is very exciting for me. I'm currently working as the literacy specialist for the lower grades of a charter school in Brooklyn. That's where I am right now. You can see my little motivational puppy poster. But I also had sort of an unconventional path after Barnard. I too took time off, which I would highly recommend. And I worked as the Diversity and Inclusion Strategy Program Manager at IBM. So, I'm sorry, I need to move rooms. Can we pass this to someone else and come back to me? Sorry, thank you so much.
No problem. I'll turn things over to Brooke.
Hi, I can jump in. I'm in a stable place for now. Working in a school environment, you are often bumped out of spaces, so that is pretty typical. So I'm Brooke Waldman. I graduated in 2007, which makes me like an older alum already. And I had a degree in American Studies with no idea what I wanted to do after Barnard. I had a minor in dance, a minor in psychology, and was super confused, but found my way into the independent school world. And I taught for 11 years in various schools, kindergarten, second grade, fourth grade. Took some time to get my master's degree in Nashville at Vanderbilt at Peabody College. Had every intention of staying in the classroom forever. I loved being a classroom teacher. I did Beyond Barnard panels about education and classroom teaching. And the pandemic kind of threw everything for a loop. It just really changed the environment for me. I had been working part-time as a stipend position at my current school, Columbia Grammar, where I am right now, just 20 blocks south of y'all. And I was working as the grammar school social studies curriculum coordinator as a stipend position. So just kind of as a passion project. And with a new administration to our school, they decided to make curriculum coordinators for all 4 curriculum areas, literacy, math, social studies, and STEM, or STEAM now. And I applied for the position full time. And now this is my first year in this role. So this is my first year outside of the classroom, full-time curriculum coordinator. It is both frightening to leave the classroom, a place that I feel very comfortable, but also really exciting because we're doing a lot of thought work and curriculum planning and design. And I feel like I'm kind of starting a new phase of my career.
And how much do you miss the classroom?
I miss it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There are things I miss and there are things I don't miss. I'm spending a lot of time in classrooms still. A lot of classroom teachers are having me come in and work with social studies. And like I was in a 3rd grade classroom, a kindergarten classroom, and a 4th grade classroom today. So I'm still kind of getting the best of teaching with other time to say goodbye to the parts that maybe I had grown tired. It's exhausting. It's the most rewarding and incredible career. I loved being a classroom teacher, but it's a lot of work. So I thought I'd be doing this for like 5 years and then I would figure it out. And then after 5 years, I was like, I love this. I'm never leaving the classroom. And then another 6 years and a pandemic, and here I am. So
best laid plans, as they say. I taught for 10 years high school social studies, and it always amazed me how exhausted I was in September. It took always a good 2 or 3 weeks to kind of get the stamina back and just that energy of interacting with so many people every day. Zofia, you good? You're in a stable room now?
I am, yes, fingers crossed. I'm sorry about that again. Thank you all for your patience and flexibility. Graduated, worked at IBM, but yeah, so I always knew that I wanted to return to the field of education. My love for early childhood education actually started at the Barnard Toddler Center. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it or have worked there. It was incredible. So I wanted to kind of explore, my degree was in psychology, wanted to explore kind of a different domain in terms of how I could leverage that degree, but quickly realized that adults are much more difficult to teach than children. So wanted to really go back and kind of make the change early, kind of so to speak. I work primarily with children with disabilities and bilingual children. Many of them are bilingual children with disabilities. So it's a very, very specific population with kind of unique needs. And that's primarily what my role is right now. But I have worked in both private and public bilingual schools, in ICT classrooms primarily. And I don't really know what the future holds. I graduate with my degree in May. fingers crossed, and I'm kind of just seeing where life takes me, which I think many of us can probably relate to that. But yeah, so right now I'm at Tompkins in the classroom, Tompkins Nursery School, and then my role here is similar, sort of a combination of push in and pull out, working with a more kind of specific population.
And our fourth panelist, Morgan.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Sometimes my earphones are weird. Okay, awesome. Yay. So I'm Morgan. I'm Barnard class of 2019. So I guess kind of similar to everyone, I always knew I wanted to be in education. I knew I didn't want to be a teacher, but I didn't really know where to go with that. So during undergrad, I majored in psychology and human rights. And then I majored in studies in dance. And so I've always kind of been interested in this idea of like education, youth mentorship. So upon graduating, I was like, what am I going to do? Where do I want to go? And I found this really amazing fellowship through AmeriCorps. So I was a teaching fellow at a charter school for 2 years. And in that role, I did a small group individualized learning with students who were like 2 to 3 years below grade level. And so I worked with them in English language arts. And so worked with like reading and writing development. And then my second year in that program, I ended up becoming a supervisor who actually coached the incoming fellows. And so in that role, I was more adult focused than child focused. And I was like, oh, I realized, similar to what Zofia was saying, that working with adults and teaching adults is a lot harder than the youths. And so I was like, you know what, I want to make another transition and kind of get back to where I'm interested in, working with youth and kind of in that mentorship role to students. And so during the pandemic, I recently transitioned over and I'm now working with the Posse Foundation as a trainer. And so the Posse Foundation is a education nonprofit. We do college access. And so we have like a full tuition leadership scholarship for students at our partner universities. And so a lot of our work is kind of creating a more diverse pool of students at those schools, providing mentorship and coaching, workshops for those students, identity-based workshops to kind of help them get prepared to go to college as a group, and then helping them throughout their application process. And then while in school, we kind of mentor them through weekly mentor coaching calls, go on campus and host workshops with them and things like that. And that's been really fun and enjoyable, and I'm loving it. I'm kind of working with that high school to college aged student. But I think, yeah, throughout my time in undergrad and even before that, I've worked with a large range of students and ages. I worked at Tompkins Nursery during my time at Barnard, actually, and then did some dance teaching and education, movement education. So lots of different realms of education, but I'm really liking this like college access work that I'm doing now. But yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
That's great. So I already see some themes emerging and a really interesting mix of people who were determined never to be teachers and others who were teachers and have moved out of it. So really, really interesting mix of stuff. I'm going to ask a couple of questions and then open it to the group. But if anybody has a question as we go along, definitely you can type it into the chat, either to me or Yarelis directly or to the whole group. And as I said, we'll definitely leave time at the end for people to ask questions either out loud or again in the chat. So I was curious, a couple of you have already mentioned the pandemic and the impact, but I wanted to ask about what do you consider key skills or competencies that are essential to your work and to the field you're in, and bringing COVID into that, has that changed at all, or as having to work in virtual or hybrid environments added other key skills and competencies? So I think I'll start with Brooke this time.
Sure. So I had a very unique experience with the pandemic. Like everyone else, I gave birth to my daughter December 2019, went on maternity leave with every intention to return to my classroom in April 2020, and never did. So I returned to an environment that was unreal. It is the best way to describe it. And speaking to friends and my other Barnard alum, the shift that we all had to make in education was so enormous because our job had never been done like this. Or in speaking to my husband, he just put his meetings online, right? They were working already in a way that they could adapt. It was different, but they were essentially doing their job just in a new platform. And schools across the nation and education just completely was turned on its head. We had to not only think about ourselves as, you know, in the midst of a pandemic, of course, but we had families that were scared. We teach, our school is pre-K through 12. The grammar school is pre-K through 4th grade. So we're working with students who don't have competencies with technology, and who have to sustain attention on Zoom, teachers who have varying degrees of comfortability on a laptop. So I think, and then the following school year, so last school year, we were able to return to school in October. But in an environment that, and still we are currently in this environment as our students are just getting vaccinated, that at any moment we could be sent home. And it's happening. There's been about almost a class every week that's been quarantined for this school year at any point. So I think one of the greatest things I've learned is resilience and flexibility. And it is, we all feel it as students, as educators, that we have to, and it's something that I dealt with as a teacher too. You know, you have your best laid plans and you have 17 other plans ready to go. But I think what COVID has taught me in education is that being flexible, being resilient, knowing that we have to put the social emotional needs of our students first, because if a student is scared or worried, or family is scared or worried, they're not going to learn. It's just, you know, Maslow's hierarchy. If our basic needs aren't being met, we're not going to be able to learn. And so the pandemic taught me a lot also, as just a colleague, as now I'm in a leadership role. So I have to now be thinking about what my teachers need, how much is too much. Sometimes we have initiatives, like I'm working on a social studies curriculum map that's spanning pre-K through 4th grade. And there are times that teachers show up to meetings and they're in tears and they're not available mentally to do this work right now. And we just cannot forge ahead. We have to take a step back and know that it's just going to take a little bit longer. So I think there's been a lot of silver linings, but it's going to take a while to be at a place where we feel on solid ground.
For that, yeah, it's you hear a lot about what's happening with teachers and students in classroom, and some people obviously are experiencing it with their own children, but it's really helpful to sort of hear all your insights on that. Zofia, I'm going to go to you, same question, you know, key skills or competencies that you feel are essential to your work, and then if you want to, you know, sort of talk about how COVID has impacted or expanded that.
Sure. I mean, I think that Brooke made some super important points. I think when I reflect on kind of this question and what the last couple of years has looked like, for me, it's really leaning into this idea of a pedagogy of humility, and really being able to kind of let go of a lot of the control that teachers like to have, or, you know, and working in education in general. There's a level of preparedness that you want to have that, you know, didn't fully go out the window. But like Brooke was saying, there were times, I was teaching in person last year, which was very challenging, but there were a lot of times where it was just, oh, we're actually not coming to school tomorrow, but we're doing virtual school. So, you know, what you do with them is kind of up to you. And it's this idea of that it's really, you have to be able to really think on your feet and kind of, it's like a level of self-direction, and that, you know, maybe you don't kind of experience when you're in school and things are kind of more normal because you have the support of other teachers and your administration. But I think the kind of emotional aspect of really acknowledging the importance of self-care and maintaining communities is just so important. Like, you can't pour from an empty cup. And we are so, like, as educators, we're so dedicated to our schools and to our communities that it can be very exhausting and very taxing. So I think this idea of resilience and flexibility are two huge, like, keystones in terms of kind of what I've learned. But I think it also provided a lot of really important insight into like just kind of our students as people instead of just students as students. With virtual learning, you're you're entering your students' homes, and their family is very involved just out of necessity. I think especially with the younger children, they, it relies a lot on the familial support, and just kind of knowing what your students are going through at home. One of my students, they lost their home due to COVID, and they were living in a shelter. So he was taking his Zoom classes from a shelter, and just knowing kind of how to be responsive as a teacher, because the learning environment and the learning experiences look so different when children don't have a place that they can kind of come to and recenter themselves and sort of get away from the world, because the learning is now happening in the world. So just being kind of extra conscientious, and that's something that I'm bringing into my practice now of, what does learning look like for you outside of the school, even though we're back in person, and how can I continue to give you that support you need, even though we're no longer just learning in a virtual setting.
That's really interesting. And Morgan, what can you tell our students here about the core competencies and, of course, how they've been challenged this past 2 years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the, I guess the two main things I'm kind of thinking, two buckets I'm kind of thinking about right now is this idea of relationship building, and then also boundary setting, which I think is going to pour a lot into kind of what Zofia and Brooke were saying as well. And I think the pandemic really highlighted the difficulties, right, of building relationships with students virtually. And I remember, like, at the time when the pandemic struck, I was working at a middle school. And so a lot of having to transition over was, how do we support these students while also being able to support ourselves, right? Having to build these whole new systems. How do you engage a student over Zoom, when their background's really loud and mom's teaching and siblings here, or we're all sharing, one laptop? How do you do that? And how do you do that while also being able to take care of yourself? Because a lot of times I remember we had a student who, couldn't log on during the day, but could log on after 6 to do class. So, we're willing to be like, all right, cool, we'll come in, teach throughout the day, do our thing, but also log back on to redo, our whole lessons with the student after school, because they don't watch the videos on their own. Student was like, they're middle school, they were 12, so a lot of it was a lot of that. But then how do you, set those boundaries for yourself? Because I think a lot of pandemic learning for me was, when to close the laptop. I think that as an educator, your first impulse is students first, as it should be. But just as Zofia said, you can't pour from an empty cup. And so I think that was a lot of my journey, was learning to do that. And I think on the relationship building aspect now that I'm in my new role, we're working with high school and college students. And a lot of our college students are on campuses, whereas we are still in New York. And so fall, we weren't able to really visit the students on campus, but in the spring we will. But coming on this summer, I'm kind of in a place where I'm trying to build these relationships with these new students who I'm meeting, so I can be a mentor to them and be someone they can trust and know is going to support them. And I think it's a lot of like having check-ins, over Zoom and one-on-one phone calls, but it's really just like not the same. And so finding, ways to imbue humanity, into this like Zoom world has definitely been a huge challenge. But I will say that working at a middle school mid-pandemic, I am a Zoom champion at this point. Like, we had the music, we had fun slides. So I think learning Zoom was definitely a huge thing. I'm a Zoom champion. If you need any Zoom help ever, I got you. But I think those are the two main areas that I've been kind of thinking about and troubling with.
That would be a great workshop. Everybody's sharing all their Zoom tips. Because even now, after 2 years, it's like, oh, you can do that. I was just in a meeting yesterday and someone was like, I didn't know you could do that. So lots of shared knowledge out there. Idira, same question.
I think everyone pretty much said it in terms of all that we had to definitely incorporate with the pandemic. I think for our organization in particular, it was very hard because the core of our organization comes through summer activities. Each year, our students do a different summer experience starting after they graduate from middle school. So that summer from middle school to high school, they actually go to Wyoming for a month and spend a month at a camp, and they have cabins and they do rock rappelling, whitewater rafting, all of these great things, all the way up to their senior year. So we essentially had to tell our students that unfortunately we would not be able to provide those experiences that they all look forward to when joining our program. Usually the first year, they know, oh, I'm going to camp this summer. And these are experiences that they have never had before. So to essentially have to cut those experiences for a lot of our students was really hard. And that allowed for us to be a little bit more creative and innovative with what it is that we provide with for our students. So we knew we wanted to still have these elements, but we just needed to know how to do it in a virtual way that was, to Morgan's point, very engaging, fun, and exciting, but also understanding and knowing that our students come from very dynamic households. The majority of our students are actually from low-income households. They live in inner city neighborhoods within Los Angeles. So we understand that going into their homes through Zoom is very, for some, very hard. A lot of our students express that. So we really wanted to go to the students first, asking them, what is it that you want to see? Do you want to have this element recreated on Zoom? Do you want to just have hangout sessions where we give you all a space in a virtual setting to just meet up with your friends, have lunch? So we did incorporate those elements into our programming. We had chat and chew experiences every Friday where we just had them come on Zoom on Friday and talk about things that were going on within their personal lives, social lives. They all became like fans of Nintendo Switch and all of these video games. So we just gave them a space to play together. So it was really nice to see that come in because that wasn't necessarily within our program before. And now after COVID, we're still finding ways to continue to implement those programs while bringing back our in-person activities. So it's really fun that we are able to expand and grow and continue to change. And I think that's what our organization has really come to through the pandemic, is that we do have these core elements, but it's okay to evolve. It's okay to grow. It's okay to change things, especially with an organization that's been in existence for 20 years. It's sometimes hard to say, we can do this differently, especially with the board that wants to help out as well. So I think the nonprofit sector is really cool that it allows for you to do that. It allows for you to be very dynamic in what you do for the group of individuals that you are serving.
So just a little follow-up. I'm just curious if you think back on where you were at Barnard and where you're at now. What's a key skill or competency that you're just really proud of at this point that you've developed?
I think from Barnard, that I incorporate every day is my networking skills. I love connecting with professors while at Barnard. I love going to different clubs and being active in multiple capacities. And I've even found that I've called on my Barnard sisters a lot more through COVID. And after COVID, I actually had one of my Barnard friends, Sania, do a workshop during our virtual summer programming. So it's really nice to still utilize those networking skills that I used at Barnard in my everyday work. Sometimes my Barnard sisters are the first people that I turn to of like, hey, do you know this? Or do you have any connects that can do this type of workshop on mental health? So it definitely comes through in all that I do still today.
That's great. So a couple of you touched on, your organization and your students, the people you work with, diversity and equity and inclusion issues. I'm curious, I'm going to sort of move to the other half of that question, which is yourselves within that environment. How have your visible and invisible identities played out in your career thus far? I'm going to let, even though she looks like she's still thinking, I'm going to let Zofia tackle that first.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I think something that I've been kind of navigating, especially recently with my research, has been just this idea of that you can never be totally objective or totally impartial, because you do come to any role, any school, any organization with your lived experiences, with the intersectionality of your identity, whatever that may look like. So really actually kind of leaning into that, and how can I leverage my experiences and my passions to make the kind of change that I am personally interested in. So I am a bilingual Latina woman. So because of that, I'm really interested in helping bilingual Latina girls. And, so I think it's just about kind of finding what resonates with you, but really kind of thinking about why that is. And kind of inspecting the different elements of your identity to see kind of where you are privileged and where you are disadvantaged. And, you know, using your platform and your voice kind of wherever that may lie to advocate for others and to kind of continue to lift up the future generations as we try to build a more equitable world. So I don't know if that totally answered it, but.
No, that's great. And Morgan, same question.
Yeah, I think thinking about my team that I work with now at Posse New York, I think that was one of the draws for me for going there, was that I saw the team and I was like, oh my God, this is such like an amazing group of people, like very unique, like such a diverse array that creates the team. And I thought I could see myself in them. I could see myself there. There's an authenticity to like the way that everyone carried themselves. And I think that's something that we want on our teams, that as we were working with students, right, as we're recruiting students to come be a part of our scholarship, come be a part of this amazing support system. You want students to look at that and see themselves in that, and see someone that they can, like, I can see myself talking to this person, you know, every day. I could see myself calling this person to be like, hey, I'm struggling in this class and I need help with, you know, advocating for this kind of resources, right? You want your students to look at you and see themselves in you. And so I think that in terms of our team right now, we're doing a really great job, especially given with Posse, like we're working with a lot of PWIs, and the student bodies that we're serving are a lot of underrepresented groups. And so a lot of Black and brown students from like different areas in the city, but we're sending them to these schools, you know, in Massachusetts and Wisconsin and, you know, Indiana and all these places that are so foreign to them, you know, and even though they have their Posse with them, like this group of students that look and have similar experiences to them, they're in this new space. And a lot of times it's a very white space, which for them is like very not usual. And so I think it's important that the people that they're speaking to and working with, they feel that support and have that kind of shared something there, a shared experience, or someone who they know they can like look at, and possibly because of your identity, or just because you approach with such an authenticity, you know, to who you are, they can connect with you. And so I think that that's super important. And I think that right now, you know, as best as we can, you know, with the systems that we're within, I think that Posse is like trying our best to like do that with those students. But yeah, if that answered.
No, definitely. And Idira, same question.
I resonate a lot with what Morgan said in terms of working in a college access program and being able to ensure that we're providing our students with the right types of support based off of their multiple identities, and ensuring that we're being exclusive of them all when we do provide them with information on schools that they may be interested in applying to, or the clubs and elements of an institution that they should be looking at to see if they are at those schools, that they can participate in them when they essentially go to those schools. So it's interesting being in that space where now I'm on the other side, because I came into this type of work because I was on the receiving end of a lot of these types of organizations, and I understood the benefits that they had for me in terms of access, exposure. But now being on the opposite end, it's nice being able to essentially use my identities and my experiences to help support them. When I do check-ins with my students and we're talking about things, it's nice to be able to say, oh, I know what you're going through. Like I remember in my experience, and may not be the same, that I had to do X, Y, and Z to really survive through, you know, my time at Barnard or through my time in graduate school. And then also in doing that, sharing with them different resources and opportunities that they can also take advantage of. But I think going into education within the nonprofit sector, I really utilize my own identities to realize this is the sector that I want to be in. Doing a master's in public administration or MPA program, you learn the elements and the tools that equip you to succeed within any of the three sectors. That's the private sector, the public sector, and the nonprofit sector. So choosing this work within the nonprofit sector was a goal of mine because of how mission driven it is and how value based it is. So when it came to looking for different jobs, it was nice to go specifically to nonprofit organizations that had a mission that aligned with my personal values, that aligned with my identities, so that when I was doing this type of work, I just would know that I would connect with it, I would love it. So that's why I always tell my students, make sure you're doing something that you really love, make sure you're doing your research to see if you belong, and that you will continue to thrive. at that institution. So it's really important to, in my opinion, within education, look at your identities and see how they can help to support others.
Great, thank you. And Brooke, what's your perspective on this? How have your visible and invisible identities played out in your career?
So I think it's interesting that I went to an all-women's college and then found myself in education in an elementary environment, which I am primarily surrounded by women. And I think about that a lot. But something I learned, and I guess I was maybe naive to think, is leadership positions are not always given to women, despite the majority of our faculty, especially in the grammar school, being women. So it was something that I noted and something that I've seen, not just at our school, but, in other schools I've worked at, or when I was living and working in the South, in Nashville. So it's something that I've thought about a lot. And now that I'm in a position of leadership outside of the classroom, thinking about how to use a position of power and of privilege as a white woman to make sure that our curriculum reflects our student body. And I think we have a responsibility as educators to do that. And I take it really seriously. And we recently did an audit of our curriculum, specifically through this lens of social studies. And it was eye-opening, I think, to a lot of teachers who thought they were doing the work and then looked at the texts and then said, okay, but we have diverse characters. And then the question was, well, who's writing those books? And are their own voices? Specifically, we looked at our third grade Native American unit, and we even started thinking about the renaming of the unit. Should we be calling it Native American? Should we be talking about Indigenous peoples? What about own voices? What narratives are we telling? So it's really important, and it's really important to continue to be reflective and be open and willing to change. It's not I find that teachers are open to change and want to do what's best for their students, but it's a lot of work. And so part of my job, I feel, is to make the heavy lifting a little lighter. So creating an audit for teachers to utilize and having something user-friendly, and then being able to say, okay, so if we're getting rid of this text because we want to make sure we have diverse authors, and so what are we going to put in that place? So being ready and available, and with resources, essentially. So I've recently been thinking a lot about, what does a position of leadership mean when you have the power to actually make changes within an organization, and we're trying, but it's an uphill battle. It really is a lot of the time to make changes that are reflective sometimes.
People resist change. It's kind of a natural state, hard to fight against. I want to just ask one more quick question, try and do sort of a speed round and then open things up to the students who are on the call. And that would be a key piece of advice you would give to a Barnard student who wants to enter your specific field. And let's start with Idira.
Ooh, a key piece of advice. There's so much, but I will say it again. I think it's great to take a break in between and really do your research, figure out what you want to do. Because you may get to a certain point where you still don't know what you want to do. I'm one of those people where I don't know where I'll be in 5 years. So definitely take the time to figure out what you want to do. And I would also say volunteer. I think, especially within the nonprofit sector, it's nice being introduced to different organizations that are doing the work that you're doing. In Los Angeles in particular, there is a huge population of education, high college access and success nonprofit organizations. And in a sense, we're all a little family that are just getting the work done. So if you have the opportunity to volunteer and just introduce yourself to a new setting, new people, then definitely do that.
And Zofia.
Yeah, I think I would say take the time to take care of yourself. sometimes it can be really easy to throw your whole self and your whole heart into what you're doing. But especially in a role like this, where we are serving the community, serving other teachers, serving children, it can be really easy to feel very depleted and burnt, almost this feeling of like a burnout when you're right at the beginning of your career. So really just giving yourself, like just being kind to yourself and giving yourself the time and space to really nurture yourself. And just like, I know like self-care sometimes can seem corny, but both your mental and your physical health, it does make a huge difference. So self-care, that would be my piece of advice.
And Morgan, your piece of advice.
I think my biggest piece is to like utilize your resources and your networks. Like Barnard has such an extensive pool. I mean, I utilize Barnard's networks even post-grad when I was applying for my next job, like super amazing. It's like really use it and don't be scared to use it, because that's what all these resources are for. And I think that I know from my experience, I was saying that when I first got into undergrad, I had a lot of imposter syndrome, and I was like, oh my God, like I was so scared to ask for help because I thought that meant that I was failing. And that's something that I see a lot in the students that I'm working with now in Posse with these underrepresented students at these all these like great institutions. A lot of times they're scared to ask for help until like it's too late, or not too late, but later on when it was like, oh, if you had just let us know that you were struggling in this way, we could have supported you better. We could have provided you with a different kind of resource if this wasn't working with you. And so I think that's something super huge, is like use those networks, like reach out for help, ask questions, like all those things are perfectly okay and really wonderful and good. And those are strengths, and you use them as strengths. So I can never like harp on that enough, like use your resources and your networks.
That's great. And Brooke?
I would say being a lifelong learner is something that I learned at Barnard, that like the learning never ends. I've become addicted to like podcasts. And I feel like even if it doesn't have anything to do with education, like I've become completely like Adam Grant has become somebody I've been listening to and reading, he has nothing particularly for education, although it is completely relatable to the education field. But in reading someone's work and listening to somebody that I admire, I find I'm constantly finding ways to make myself a better human, a better educator, a better mother, a better friend. And I think I learned that at Barnard, like that learning and being a student forever will serve you well. And it goes to Morgan's point about, like your network just increases, and and the self-care, right? All that we're doing. And if it's a podcast, if it's a book, if it's an article, if it's a documentary, if it's, attending a Zoom, I just highly recommend staying engaged and opening your mind to possibilities that are maybe outside of the fields of education, but could really be relatable one day.
That's great. Thank you for all that good advice. And thank you for all of your thoughtful answers. And I want to open things up to the group. If you are comfortable unmuting or coming off camera, you can ask your question live or put it in the chat. We talked a lot of big picture stuff. If you have, specific questions about day-to-day or specifics on, the process of getting this type of job, or more big picture questions, whatever you are curious about with our 4 alumni in front of us.
I have a question. Hi. So thank you so much, first of all, for like having this whole Zoom. This has been really helpful. I'm kind of also just in the process of thinking about like what I want to do, and I'm thinking about education, but also just like different things along those lines. And I know some of you mentioned that you worked with adults previously in teaching. And so I'm just thinking about like, how was working with adults different from working with kids? What were the challenges with teaching adults? What were the challenges with teaching kids, and how are those were different? Which ones do you like better? Yeah, thank you so much.
Great. Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Jump in a little bit. Yeah, so I guess like working with adults, for me, the main difference I think is that when it comes to like working with youth and students and like people who are younger, I think that there's a openness to grow, I think, because they're like seeking it, really seeking it, which a lot of adults, right? Like if some people have this growth mindset always, which is good, but there are some adults I think are, have learned a way of doing things and are a little bit sometimes more resistant to change and resistant to kind of like being open to ideas. And so I think, but in the same way as with working with students, like I found as in my second year role in the America Fellowship, working with adults, like young adults, a lot of it really went back on the same foundations of relationship building, right? Building that trust, building that support. So as a supervisor, as a coach for them, like really building our relationship so that they could trust my judgment, right? So they could come to me for advice. So they didn't feel like they were still, struggling on their own or having to work through, whatever difficulty they're having with a student on their own. And so I think that even though, sometimes I think you can go into thinking things are different. I think I enjoy working with youths more just because I think sometimes it's just a little, there's something sweet and fun and wonderful, I think, about younger people, just like very fun. And so I think that's what draws me more, but I think either way, if you have strong relationships, you'll be successful either way.
Any other panelists want to address that specific question, or anybody else want to hop in with another question?
Yeah, I think the only other thing that comes to mind, and kind of harkening back to this idea of the imposter syndrome, is when you work with children, my students think that I'm 50, they think that I'm a grandma. And it's this kind of, you feel like you kind of do know what you're doing because your students trust you and they look up to you. I think when I was working at IBM, I was working with people who were in their 50s, in their 60s, who had worked at IBM for 20 years. And then all of a sudden it's sort of like, who is this early professional coming in, managing my diversity program? So I think it's kind of a mindset shift as well. I found it like more challenging working with adults, partially for that reason of this need to kind of prove yourself or wondering if you're even right for this role in a way that I haven't necessarily felt working with children. So I think it's just kind of different, like inner work of just being really confident in like, I'm here for a reason and I am capable, even though I'm an early professional. And I think as young women too, there's kind of an extra level of this need to kind of go above and beyond to show that you deserve to be there. As a woman of color, I mean, there's so many different kind of elements that go into it, but I think it's a different skill set too, in terms of you feeling kind of not competent, but just confident even in your role and just the work that it takes to build those skills.
Thank you. Other questions, other thoughts?
I have a specific question for Idira, if that's okay. And I just wanted to thank all the panelists for all their insight and advice. And my question for Idira is, so you mentioned how you did your Master of Public Administration, and I was just wondering about that process and that experience and how it influenced the work that you do today, like the knowledge and understandings that you took with your studies in grad school and how that translated into the work you're doing right now.
Thanks for the question, Fiona. Yes, so the process of getting an MPA was long. I didn't even know what an MPA was before I even thought about getting one. I had a friend who graduated with an MPA and it was focused on education. I was like, oh, I didn't know that existed. So just doing more research and then also finding out you have to take the GRE. And I'm not a great standardized test taker. I don't believe in standardized tests, but that's another story. But having to prepare for that and take that exam and finding programs that matched for me was, in I would say, about a year-long process. And once I did decide to go to the University of Washington, I always credit that experience, those 2 years there, to the reason why I am succeeding within education today, because a lot of the experiences, whether it be our required internship or a capstone project, I was able to focus a lot of my research on education. And the great thing about going to a great university. You can cross, same as we did at Barnard, but I took a lot of classes at the education school at University of Washington. So it was interesting that a lot of the core research that I did was within those classes. And I also did work study jobs and graduate assistantships that focused on education. So I was an application reader for University of Washington. I was a TA, so having that element of advising was within my experience. And I also worked as a graduate intern with their academic success, academic student support programs. And that was the 2-year experience where I specifically worked with students who were struggling academically and also students who were reinstated into the university. So students that had to leave for different academic purposes, but were able to re-enroll to the institution. So all in all, that experience is what helped me become a college counselor with with C5LA through their College Access, Persistence, and Success team. And a lot of it based off of just working with students that had different types of experiences and challenges that they were going through, and having to be a critical thinker, having to apply your research and your solutions that you provided to students. Was what I did at the UW, but also what I do in my everyday work. So I would say if you're unsure about going into a graduate program, I would definitely talk to the current students that are there, whether they're ambassadors or talking to alum to see if what it is that you did within your program made the most sense. And I definitely would say that those 2 years helped me get into the education department.
That's great. Thank you for that. That's good. Great question. Great answer. Always want to pause for a minute to give a plug for Beyond Barnard. One thing, we still encounter students, even as they are about to graduate, who don't realize that Beyond Barnard continues to provide support to alumni. So lifelong career support, and that includes actually graduate school advising, which we obviously can support you while you're a student, especially if you are going right away to graduate school. But we work with a lot of alumni who decide down the road, 1 year, 2 year, 10 years, 20 years, that they want to go back to graduate school. And we're here for you to sort of talk through that process of, find out what an MPA is and find out what the various options are, as well as the nitty gritty of applying. So just want to put that plug in that we're here for you. And I think we've got time for one more question if anybody's got one.
If there's not a question, I'll just end with something that I'm thinking about. Being in education, no matter what capacity, is one of the most rewarding career decisions that I can't, to be honest, I can't really speak to anything else. So it's not a really fair comparison. But I've been out of Barnard for 15 years now. And it is despite that there could be bad days, and that comes with the territory, but it is a wonderful career choice no matter what capacity you're in. And there's lots of different options. I think I left Barnard thinking that there was like teacher, principal, superintendent, and there's just so many opportunities, and the field is continuing to grow in so many ways. So if you are dedicated to and committed to education, you will find your path, no matter what lies ahead. So if anyone's considering it, I highly recommend it.
And it is one of those fields that, some people enter it early on and do move on to other fields. There's certainly a ton of transferable skills. Obviously, we've seen here today, people make shifts within the very broad field of education. And then it's interesting in this period of the Great Resignation and people rethinking their careers, not only are a lot of teachers leaving, but there actually are always a lot of people coming into it. People who always wanted to be in teaching or in education, who've been doing other things, sort of come in as well. So, and it's been, it can be welcoming in that way as well. So, all right, I think we are right up almost against 2 o'clock. Thank you all. This was a great discussion. And like I said, really excited to have been able to have this topic and be able to put it up in front of students. So thank you. And Yarelis, I don't know if you have any closing words.
Just thank you so much. The panelists, you all were incredible. Stay connected, students. Please follow up with us. And other than that, if you all have any questions, I'll be hanging out for a little bit afterwards, but enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. It was so nice to meet you all. Have a
Bye.
good
Thank
day.
you.
Thank you.
Thank